Who's hanging, young hero, besides your head and spirit? That soul is saying something profound, so let them hear it.
Welcome to Giant Size Violence, the Toku Comics podcast. I'm your host, Tommy, and joining me today is Sarah Kennedy, a writer, game designer, and developer that's worked on over 70 tabletop games, including RPGs for Star Trek, Power Rangers, My Little Pony, Werewolf the Apocalypse, and Sentai Sensibility. She's also contributed to short comics to various anthologies, and she just might love Tokusatsu shows and comics as much as I do. So, with no further ado, welcome to the show, Sarah.
Hey everyone, how you doing? I'm just glad to be here.
Yeah, I backed the Sentai Sensibility Kickstarter campaign, and I'd seen your name and bio in one of the later rewards. And yeah, I saw their bio. They said, whoa. Another like trans Toku person that did the Power Rangers campaign RPG and like a million other things. And now, yeah, Sentai and Sensibility, like this person's too cool for me not to try and become friends with them. So reached out via Blue Sky, and now here we are.
Aw, thank you. It's so amazing to be able to work on the stuff that I love. I mean, I've watched it since I was a kid, but it's stuff that I still enjoy, and I love all of it. Like, it doesn't matter if it's like labeled by the internet as the world's worst, like kaiju movie. I will watch it, and even if I'm watching it to laugh at it, or even if it's like something I secretly enjoy, there's so many like giant monster movies that just make me so happy. And also sometimes I just kind of revel when it's really bad. Like, there's that energy you get where it's like, oh man, you remember the Power Rangers movie from like 1999 or whenever it came out? It's really bad. And yet I want to watch it again tonight.
My favorite item in all of my nerd collection is a McDonald's placemat from that Mighty Morphin Power Rangers movie from like 94, 95. That's now signed by like all of the surviving main cast members. So like most of the Rangers, cool. Bulk and Skull, I just had sign it like a week or two ago. And yeah, even most of the comic writers so far. And every time I ask if they've ever seen this in an autograph line, and I've never gotten a yes. So like, I know I have a one-of-a-kind piece of nerd merch that I hope I can sell and retire off of someday.
You never know, maybe. I would say get it laminated, but what if there's more names you want to add to it?
My goal is that if I ever someday get to write for anything Power Rangers related, I'm putting my name on my own collectible, and then I'll feel like it's really complete.
It always feels so weird. Like I love what I do, but then there are times where people are like, you have to sign my book. And my favorite self-deprecating joke is, half-price books won't take it if it's marked. Last year, when we were signing the Star Trek Lower Decks Adventure Supplement for the Star Trek Adventures role-playing game, we had like all these cool little boxes on the inside cover. And then it just became a race between me and the other writers to make the weirdest stuff that you could draw inside people's books. And mine was the Gorn, because I'm a great writer, not a great artist. And so people like, is that like a snake sock puppet? It's like, sure. Or it's a really bad Gorn, whatever you want.
Now, speaking of like your writing and your work, I'm especially curious about like in what capacity you worked with the Power Rangers RPG, since that was one that really caught my eye. I was even briefly on a live play podcast for it. So yeah, I was curious how you where you came in on that.
I came in, so after they started getting the core book complete, they needed adventures and they needed someone to proof the adventures. And I've known Brian Steele, who used to be one of the developers for Renegade Game Studios. And I've known him most of our lives. We used to, as we affectionately put it, we dressed up and acted petty together, aka we were vampire LARPs. And he's just a blast because we're both at our hearts nerds. And we've literally just sat there we sat at a Mexican restaurant and then we were bored because we were waiting on another person to join us. And then he was just sort of like, yeah, well, it's going to be the focus of the next adventure, Salsa Man. And he's got the little salsa thing dancing around the table and he's coming up with little kung fu moves. And I'm just laughing. And he asked me, because I've worked in the industry for a while, if I could help out with getting it across the finish line. And I worked on Power Rangers: A Jump in Time, where I wrote more than half the book with him. And that's the book that focuses on time travel. And one of my all-time favorite things is writing lore. I know there are people who say, like they skip the lore sections because, they've either watched the show or they have a Wikipedia. Like, even I have to admit, it's kind of hard for me to defend what I do. And it's like, oh, so I can read about Zordon online. It's like, or you could buy my book. My book's got some cool things about Zordon, or it's on a wiki somewhere. It's like, yeah, it's a good wiki. You'll enjoy it. I stayed up 3 nights binging the whole wiki. Um, but getting to write adventures where I'm putting Power Ranger teams through traps or a jump in time was one of my favorite things to write because it's the adventure at the back half takes a bunch of my favorite heroes and villains from across Power Rangers. Like one of the focus of it is the Black Knight has returned somehow. Not to rip off Star Wars, but it's returned somehow.
Somehow he's returned.
And he's trying to resurrect his dragon in an even more monstrous form. And he's stolen so many magical artifacts that now it looks like he's going to do it. And he's rewriting time. And the players they're time rangers. And they're watching their reality slowly get turned into like ancient Camelot. And they have to go through time and they get to meet Sheriff Stranger, aka the Tommy Oliver of the Wild West. They get to meet Tom Oliver, the mayor of Angel Grove. It was so much fun going around finding all these like little just people that I enjoyed. Even like the White Knight, who we see for I think it's a total of 13 seconds. The White Knight is an important part of the adventure. And Brian is a really great hype man where he'll sit there and have the most serious face on and he'll just be like, yes, that's excellent. That's really excellent. Yes, I like this. And you can't tell if he's joking, but he's actually being very serious. And you see the wheels turning. And then he's just sort of like, this is great. Everyone will love it. I love it. I think it's great. And it's like, I can't tell if you're joking. And he's like, oh no, I really love it. It's super cool. But that's where I come into Power Rangers, where I get to make Rangers, I get to make these scenarios that they get to explore the universe with. I get to proof dangerous traps and equipment. It's a blast. And getting to write about Power Rangers going through time was so amazing because I get to take people through ancient Egypt. I get to take them through, man, I'm blanking on Zordon's culture. Yes, the Guardians briefly. And getting to put in all these references to obscure people throughout the show. Like, I have the Gold Rangers, the
Triforia?
Yeah, like in ancient Egypt.
Rad.
Right. I love, it was so amazing. It was a wonderful opportunity. And of course, when our adventure gets submitted, you're always waiting to see what the licensors are going to say because they're not bad people. They have a brand to protect. And they've literally heard every bad idea for Power Rangers in the world. And you're just crossing your fingers like, I don't want to be another bad idea for Power Rangers. I just want to have like ancient Egyptian Gold Ranger, like, because that would be super cool.
And is that usually the capacity you work on tabletops? Because I know you had contributed a story module to Sentai Sensibility as well. Or like, are you often working on the actual mechanics of like the core rule books too?
Oh, I do a little bit of everything. Like with My Little Pony, I work with Andrew Peregrine and everyone else, and it's weird to say that it was challenging because we had to approach role playing from a different perspective. Like, everybody thinks about My Little Pony, and a lot of people like to just make fun of it, like being saying that's for kids. You made a role playing game out of that? Wow. Do you miss working on adult stuff? And it's like, actually, it's not that bad. The show is pretty fun. It's got a lot of like secret geek jokes, and John Delancey shows up as essentially Q, Q in the My Little Pony universe. And it was so much fun to work on it. I did skew my demographics for YouTube because I would log into YouTube and it would be like, oh, so you watch Bluey and you watch My Little Pony. Do you like Little Einsteins? No, YouTube. I do. I've raised kids. I do not like Little Einsteins. But I do fiction. I do game mechanics. I do some editing work. I've written like lore. I make adventures and also playtesting where the joke that every game designer likes to say, am I allowed to make like kind of a crude joke?
Oh, of course.
Yeah, it's like, oh, I'm really good at playing with myself. I've managed to make a profit out of it. There are times like my partner will walk by and I'll have a bunch of pennies on a map and I'm moving them around and rolling a die and just moving the pennies around. And they'll be like, what you doing? You look like you're playing some really low stakes gambling over there. I'm like, no, I'm designing an adventure. The Rangers are fighting Tengu. The pennies are the Tengu. And that's stuff you have to work out before it goes to print, because if you make an adventure that you're sort of like, and the Rangers fight 50 million Tengu in a vacuum of space and they've got to save some astronauts, they'll be fine. And the adventure just sucks. Well, then people don't want to play it because, it's not fun. So you do kind of have to sit there and be like, oh, what a fight be like in 0G with flying birdmen. And in 20 years, I've the only thing that I've not really done successfully is layout, and that's just because InDesign continues to thwart me.
As far as writing goes, I know you're also working on a comic book.
Yeah.
Could you tell us anything about what you have in the pipeline for that and what kind of comic it is?
So I was talking to Bug, who is the one who created Sentai and Sensibility, and they're also a huge, Power Ranger and Sentai fan.
Yeah, you don't
And
say.
I can put you in touch. They're amazing.
Oh my God, please do.
And we're just talking about our favorite things, and then I was asking them where they came up with the idea for the setting of Sentai and Sensibility. And it's not just like, oh, I wanted to make a Bridgerton hack for Power Rangers. They had like all this stuff they wanted to do and all these stories. And I was just like, that is so cool. And man, what if we did stories like this? And somehow we both kind of settled on what would a noir setting be like for Power Rangers. And Bug's like, no, I'm not going to continue with this. I've got a game to make. I can't make two things at once. And I said, well, I don't know. I like the story. And I just kept spitballing things. And Bug was like, sounds like you're working on a story. I'm working on my game. And I was like, well, you know what? I'm going to write this story. And I actually started it. And I'm on like the third issue and looking at artists right now. It's kind of weird and trippy. Like, it'll definitely relate well to Kaijumax when we talk about that. But do you want to hear the basic premise?
Sure. Yeah, please share.
It's not that I have notes queued up on my iPad, which I totally do. I struggle with names, so if this name changes later on, just assume that I said the name 100 times and then was like, no, that's a bad name. It's
Okay,
called,
you're not doing like I did with When We Transform and transitioning the character halfway through.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
But it's Sentai Sun City. It's very much an homage to like not only 1930s but 1950s esque mystery movies, which I've also been watching a ton of those with my mom lately. And it follows Samson Dane, who is the Danger Red Ranger, who lives in the city, which is basically just called Super City. And it is the final battle site where all these teams came together. And we're talking this world's like, Sailor Moon and Power Rangers and Cyber Squad and VR Troopers. I've even got a reference to tattooed teenage alien fighters in Beverly Hills. The city is basically where all the monsters who were part of the Grand Army of Evil were forced to settle because they all came to Earth at the request of the Grand Empress to destroy Earth. And they get defeated, and all the major big bads are destroyed. But now their armies just kind of left on Earth, and nobody knows what to do with them. So they settled in the city along with everyone else who had ties to like super teams, where like great powers were destroyed and great leaders are gone. So you have depowered Sentai and Rangers just walking around. And Samson, he actually got hurt in the final battle. So he is constantly in his, he's got his suit on, but he can't breathe that well. So he's always smoking the drug he needs to live, which is ironic. But he's a detective because he was what he calls a third stringer. He wasn't part of the main team. He was the guy that gets called in whenever they needed like additional help. If you ever watched Samurai Pizza Cats, he's a member of the second team, pretty much.
The B list of Samurai Pizza Cats.
Yeah. His mecha is Power Goose Alpha, a giant goose Zord.
And I'm really curious how you get this to fit in like a 50s Sin City noir setting, but like you've definitely got my interest with this. Wow.
And just the basic premise is one day his old master is found dead in the city. Like he was in like a giant like jar essentially. Because not everybody came out of the final battle like to like riches and fame. A lot of them were just kind of abandoned. And now he's trying to figure out who killed his former master. And he teams up with like several other people, like Olympette, who is a former prison power princess, who is blatantly queer and was always being told to be dainty and petite on her team. And she's very much like a muscular, very much like masculine woman, super lesbian. And because I'm not going to write something that doesn't have queer stuff in it, like, because it's weird when I write things that I'm not seeing in it, and I know how important that is to other people. But yeah, it's fun. There's monsters. There's a surprise twist on who the actual killer is. It touches upon all the shows from my childhood, even if they're really, really bad. Like, I love Superhuman Samurai Cyber Squad, but we can all agree it was the Ultraman that was not Ultraman. It was, it was what, Ultraman Grid Defender or Gridman?
Gridman. And Gridman's awesome. Like, I did a whole episode on that. Gridman's great. The American version, not as much.
Yeah, I love it, but at the same time, it's there's a reason why it was a one season show. And and one of the other bad guys references I can't remember the show now, but they're essentially Dracula comes back, his ashes get reincarnated in a car, and now these three teenagers have to merge with their trucks to become essentially truck rangers. Wish I could remember the name of that series. It was really bad. It was back in the late 90s. Everything's got to be Power Rangers.
Oh, shoot. So this was like a real show?
Yeah.
I think I kind of know what you're talking about, but I had no idea a Dracula car was a part of that. Like, Futurama was ripping this shit off.
I got the name. It is what you would expect it to be. Vampires.
Perfect. No notes. Perfect name.
It's not great.
You pitched that name to me in the time of Power Rangers and Transformers, and I'm like, sold. Yes, we'll have any of the like early cable networks no one has make this. It'll come on between Ultra Force and the Savage Dragon cartoon.
Oh yeah, I love those. It is from '97 and not great. And the name of the first episode is "Those Who Have the Fuel Shall Rule." Imagine Bela Lugosi saying that.
Now, before we get too lost in the 90s, I think I should probably finally transition us to the topic of today's episode, which is a comic that both Sarah and I really love by the name of Kaijumax, written and drawn by Zander Cannon. I have wanted to cover this book on the show ever since James Herron mentioned it in the back of one of the first issues of Ultra Mega, and when I finally got the chance to check it out, was not disappointed. If anyone out there is like at all a fan of Tokusatsu, anything, Godzilla movies or Ultra stuff or Power Rangers, this book is absolutely for you. This is like the ultimate love letter to Tokusatsu, but with doing like new and original things, and I love it. But shortly after finding Sarah's work, I saw her post about it on Blue Sky, and I'm like, okay, I gotta finally move forward. I gotta finish the rest of this series. And so that was a perfect opportunity to finally bring her on the show.
I discovered this series when I was at PAX Unplugged, the first PAX Unplugged. I think it was what Oni Press was there, and they were still figuring out the show as well. And I was bored, and just in between shifts at a booth, and I'm like, "Oh, what's this comic? Oh, I like giant monsters." And I read it on like the plane ride home, which had to be really weird because there's a kid next to me, and the kid's like, "Oh, what are you reading?" I'm not sure you can read this. It looks like you should read this, but you cannot read this. But it's so good and so deep on multiple levels.
I'll just say that like this takes so many like comical tropes that we've seen even in like the cheesiest Tokusatsu shows and movies, like Son of Godzilla, and finds some really creative dark twist on it and makes something great. And yeah, I mean, like everyone I've heard that comes across this book is like in love with it. Like James Herron, who made my favorite Toku comic, like really sung its praises and was like, seriously, go read this. Alan frickin' Moore is quoted on the front of the book, and like a lot of other prolific figures in the realm of comics have seen this and been like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And yeah, I think it's probably the perfect Tokusatsu comic. So especially if you're like me and love Toku enough to make a podcast about it, this might become your favorite book.
It's weird how, like, I mean, it's not weird. It's like a lot of risky elements intersect.
Mhm.
And you look at it and you think, like for people at home, like if I was to tell you that there was a comic book that had kind of like 70s era looking giant monsters, some of them being intentionally cheeky looking, like there's literally like I think just a guy in like a giant devil suit as one of the monsters, and there's like a Rodan and a bunch of silly looking bird people. If I told you that you would take a comic with those characters and you would touch upon substance abuse issues, human trafficking, sexual assault, rent problems, prison problems, just everything. You would be like, okay, I want to talk about those because those are very serious issues, but not if you're making fun of it. And it doesn't. It incorporates it in a way that I think makes it so relatable, even though it is a comic. Okay, that sounded bad. What I mean to say is like it's brightly colored. It's like it looks like a comic from the 70s, and yet it's talking about very serious issues and not in a condescending way. You actually empathize with the characters, and when horrible things happen to them, you're like, "Oh no, I hope they get revenge because
Hmm.
that sucks."
Yeah, and there's so many huge concepts in this that like, yeah, it's definitely a cartoony depiction of all these things, but like if you were to give this the art style of like Matt Frank or Dan Mora or something, well, the comic would be beautiful and like look like the Tokusatsu movie of your dreams. Uh, I think it would be way harder to take like the type, like to stomach the talking kaiju and then like dealing with very human issues, and also just like there would be too much spectacle for the kind of story this is trying to tell because it is a very grounded human story that just happens to be about giant monsters.
Yeah, like one of my favorite stories in the comic. I mean, I'm not going to spoil everything, but they essentially encounter. They go down to Ryla, the Lovecraftian undersea city, and when they go down there, it's got some escape. The main characters are escaped fugitives at that point, and they try to shack up with someone who's down there, and they learn how there's it in this version of a Lovecraftian world. There's still like substance abuse and um, young people having too many kids in a system that doesn't support them. Deals with the generational trauma, and you read it thinking, "Oh, this is a horror story," and then you learn that the horror is not what you expected. It's not a strange creature with multiple eyes from beyond time and space. It's, oh, in the real world, there are people like this who are not getting support, and we're not helping them. And it simultaneously like cushions your landing, so it's not like hitting you in the face with it really hard, but it makes you think about it because that's what well, made me think about it for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. Now, before we get into like all of our favorite subplots and the things this book explores, I'd like to just kind of do a quick summary or more ask like, Sarah, how would you pitch this comic to someone that you think would be interested in it?
Man, it's like Oz, the TV show Oz meets Venture Brothers meets 1960s Godzilla cartoon.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's the perfect amalgamation of things to get this thing's like look, tone, and content. Because yeah, like I also say, like this is a prison drama with kaiju with all of the tropes and narrative staples you would expect from a prison drama. So like do take that as your content warning going into the series. Like this handles if you expect to see it in an R-rated prison movie, expect to see it here. And that includes like sexual violence, like various things regarding discrimination and oppression. So, like, a hefty content warning. With that said, I'll say I think they handle all those things pretty respectfully. Like, even though this is happening to giant monsters and people that look like Ultraman, like, it at least takes the ramifications seriously, and we see realistic human consequences to all these things. It's not just like doing it for shock value or to give characters motivation or like fridging them in a sense. Like it's done as a way to explore trauma, and that's the way I want to see this stuff shown in comics. It just now happens to also feature like Kmart brand Godzilla and Ultraman.
And it's incredible when like I think that for me that's what helped me identify more with it because for me, I got drawn in with, yeah, I like giant monsters, I like giant robots. Oh, hey, it's like Ultraman. That's kind of like, a team of Ultramen working as prison guards. And on the surface, like I admit, I grew up with like several prejudices that, I'm still working to overcome today. And so I'm like, oh, wow, what if I was like, a super powered prison guard at a prison for monsters? And then you see what a lot of like modern prisons are like in the comic. And the creator has been very honest about his feelings towards prisons, the justice system in the United States. And this really does kind of like put it all out there for you, where it's like, yeah, you've got the good guard, the guard that wants to do things right and will take care of the prisoners and believes them. And then you've got the 5 or 6 bad guards who don't. And I had a friend where he read it and he just talked about how it hit him hard because he had family members who had spent time in prison. And it wasn't a comic that he was going to recommend to them because he felt that it would be too triggering for him. But the stories that they told him, he saw in the comic. And he said, yeah, it sounds comical. We all joke about, hey, I'll trade, like $5 for a cigarette, or we make inappropriate jokes about how like people get turned out for, like soups essentially. But some of that actually happens. And this comic really teaches you a lot of like substance abuse issues. And like one of the subplots is about the main character who's Electrogore.
Yeah.
Yeah. Electrogore is this kaiju. He's like a beetle shrimp guy, and he makes raw plutonium nodules on his back, which we learn is to feed his kids because that's how his kids feed. They need radiation to live. All the monsters in this world, they get high off energy, but some need it to live. And he essentially has to, people realize he can feed them narcotics because too much of it makes you high. And he gets essentially like threatened and almost trafficked around this prison because he can make drugs that get people high. And seeing him try to survive as multiple prison gangs, which, man, Xander really chose like his ability to blend what sounds like comical, but what's also serious is incredible. Because some of like the prison gangs are like, that's a cryptid gang. They're made up of cryptids like Mothman and Nessie. You don't mess with the cryptid gang. And over there, you've got, I think it's the Shokugawa, which is their term for the old monster movies, and they're led by Godzilla-esque character who's a
Yeah.
giant whale.
Yeah, they call him ape whale, which I think is like a literal translation of Gojira, like what that name derived from. And all of his gang is like very clear analogs to classic like Showa era Godzilla villains like King Ghidorah and Rodan and Anguirus and such.
And it works. It's just so incredible. Like for anybody watching this, like it is. I just recommend like go to your library, see if they have the first trade, or take a chance. I really think you'll enjoy it. It sounds silly on the surface, but I assure you, like I know I'm probably like reassuring people for no reason, but it is just a really thoughtful comic that just it'll teach you a whole lot. Obviously, don't end your education there. Go on and like read blogs, like read like go on Wikipedia, watch YouTube videos.
I know there's great podcasts out there now made by people that either are now out of prison. I think there's even some made by people in prison that are very real to like what that experience is like. So like you can, if this piques your interest and you want to learn more, like you can learn directly from the people experiencing this.
And it really like opens your eyes. And I know I always try to keep learning and improving. For context, I grew up on like the east side of Indianapolis. I grew up in a really poor neighborhood. I love my grandmother, but my grandmother was extremely prejudiced, and not just in a, oh, well, she was just prejudiced, for a person from her era. No, it was love Grandma Spears, but yeah, no, it was pretty bad. And as I got older, I realized, having to overcome a lot of that, just innate, I'll be blunt, internalized bigotry, where I was never someone that like threw out like slurs left and right. But I was also someone that, like, if you found me back in high school, I was probably that little shithead who would say, why are you running if you didn't do anything wrong? If you're innocent, you don't have anything to fear from the police. And, that's the sort of thing where like this comic will definitely be like, no, here's a look at why someone might not trust the police. Here's a look at why someone feels they have to run. because maybe they had a bad experience with a cop once and they don't want to have the shit kicked out of them again. And it uses that blend of whimsy and humor to really just kind of show you, oh no, in case you didn't believe people that like you saw talk about this online, how about have like a corrupt Ultraman just beating someone up because he was paid to by space bunny mafia? It's really awesome. It's
Yeah.
weird to talk about this comic, and I hope I'm not sounding sarcastic. It really is awesome.
Yeah. I guess to give people an idea, like, because I'm assuming most hearing this probably haven't read the comic yet, but like our main plot focuses on this Electrogore character as he's captured, taken into Kaijumax for Grand Theft Electricity. Like he was just feeding on power cables under the ocean to turn into energy for his kids. Gets taken into Kaijumax, and we follow him as he's trying to escape and trying to reconnect with his kids that he knows are still out there in the world. And through his eyes, we get to see like all the realities of what kaiju deal with, kind of as like these second class citizens of sorts. Like there's various kaiju law, like a whole legal system around like how this world deals with kaiju. There's a lot of good background world building on it. And then yeah, like it's just chock full of really good side plots that like explore this world further. Like one of that's like the dark twist on Godzilla's Revenge or Son of Godzilla, where we see the son of Ape Whale starts seeing a little boy who starts telling him to do worse and worse things to like climb up the ladder of the like that particular gang. We follow guards and like seeing how like a good guard can make a mistake and it turns them into like being agoraphobic. They don't want to shrink ever. Or like, yeah, other guards owing money to cartels and that fueling like all the messed up stuff they do. We get a Mecha Godzilla stand-in that's like now a pacifist, and seeing how like Mecha Kaiju respond to all this is like kind of religious zealots of sorts that worship the cloud.
The Great Cloud, yeah.
Yeah, like
Where one
get
day all will
uploaded.
be stored in the cloud.
All will be uploaded. But yeah, we get like an abusive relationship between a lady Ultraman guard and like the most awful monster in the series, and seeing how that affects her in her life and other characters' lives. And personal favorite was I forget his name, but the goat man that's being manipulated by like an evil volcano. We find out is also
I loved him.
Yeah, like I really like what they did with his story and how things turned out. Like there were moments that made me cry with that character.
He's based off the Pope Lick monster, which is apparently a demonic devil goat. But in the, I went to Kentucky recently. I found out about it, and I'm like, oh, that's what I read the comic. And yeah, he's the literal son of the devil, but his body is a little goat dude. And yeah, it's yeah, his storyline. I was so happy with how it ended, but it takes some dark turns.
Yeah, like he's kind of the real victim of Kaijumax that you see like just trying to survive as like generally a really innocent character. Like I don't think he did do anything wrong. We find out like he's just kind of taking the rap for what others have done, and finding out like he's always been in this position as like the son of literally the devil. Like his super religious mom comes and she's like a nun, and then we find out she's a Satanist nun. That was like one of my favorite twists ever.
Yeah, I just love the sweet moments too, where it's just it's so good. I know that's not a way to pitch a comic. You can't just keep saying it's so good, but I think about all the stories. Like, one of my favorite things that just popped up about that was also like they go to court.
Yeah.
And one of the like you talked about it earlier. They talk about how tough the public defender system is because so there's Pokemon in this world. They're also kaiju, but there's Pokemon. And imagine if Meowth was a really tired public defender and he works for two showboating attorneys, and he's trying to convince people to be like, no, look, just plead guilty. You plead guilty, we'll get 3 years. If you fight this, you'll get the chair. But come on, if you just plead guilty. And you see how people like to make fun of public defenders and how he's showing up in an old suit, kind of like Better Call Saul. And all like the prosecutors and even some of the more high profile public defenders, like they represent clients that can pay them like $1 million or those weird little discs they use in the comic. but he doesn't get paid that. But people still need a defense, and they need a good defense. Like, they talk about how everybody's entitled to a defense in the United States, but not everybody gets that.
That was one thing I liked about the structure of the series. Like, I had thought it was only 3 volumes long for a while because I was at Howell's City of Books when I looked through their massive indie comic section.
I love that place.
And like the first 3 volumes tell a very full story that like follows Electrogore and like explores the world. But then in the second half, the last 3 volumes, like each one takes a pretty clear source of inspiration. Yeah, the whole fifth volume is very Pokemon focused. And like we even see they have like reverse Pokemon battles. Like there's underground dog fights, but with humans instead. And like even treating it like a Pokemon battle.
I remember, because I just remember just like a kid gets put up against like a former soldier, and it made me definitely think. I love Pokemon. I play Pokemon Go every day, but it is weird when people are like, "Isn't it like animal fighting?" And I'm like, "Oh, I hope not," because I love this game. But also, that would make me very, very sad.
And yeah, like the world of references they build in this, like it's everywhere and very sentimental usually, even when it's something silly. Like we find out the prison warden and the person he answers to are what I've heard other kaiju podcasts refer to as Kennies, like from Gamera, like the little kid sidekicks that they focus on. Yeah, the prison warden and his superior are both like Kennies that had this really traumatic experience with a giant turtle kaiju that they were trying to champion, but like it was just their imagination that he was good. He was still just there to eat people.
Yeah, like, oh no, he's good. Yeah, he knocked over that tower and that school bus, and now he's devouring that school and the children on the playground. And yeah, I that would probably be my luck, where I'd be like, no, no, Gigan's a good guy. I love Gigan. He's great to his mom. He's got a buzz saw on his belly, but surely he's a good guy. Up, he's killing people. He's killing a lot of people. He's siding with Ghidorah. Yeah, no, this isn't good.
What I think was the most impressive about Zander Cannon's use of references, though, is that like he really builds like a kaiju language full of like slang that is believable, but also clear references to various Toku properties. Like anytime they say "goddamn," they say "Goj damn," as in like the first 3 letters of Gojira. Like, oh, okay, I see what you're doing there. Or like Red King is what they use in place of the F word or as an insult, which is like reference to an Ultraman kaiju. I think one of my favorite was like no one respects Woofy, the son of Ape Whale that's like he looks like Minya. He's that like nervous and goofy looking and like doesn't want to fight. So they call him a Zuki ass kid, like God Zuki, the little dragon from the 60s cartoon. And yeah, just everything they put in there. Like I don't know if I've ever seen a comic like build a language like this well.
And it flows so seamlessly. Like, I love Battlestar Galactica from the 2000s, but there are times where they relied on frack so that they could say the F word on TV. There are times when it just didn't really work. It was just very much like it was a made up word put in place in the sentence. They really wanted to be like, "You mother fracker," and it's like, we know what you were trying to say, okay. But in this one, like it like they'll say like, "What's up, Myzilla?" as they see each prison yard, and it works. And all the other things about the culture too, like I talked about how they feed on radiation, but some of them like they dose with it, and like they'll inject themselves with industrial waste to get high, or instead of cigarettes, they have smokestacks full of smog that they puff out of it like a cigar. It's taking the normal and horrifying and kind of making it into like the extraordinary but also horrifying.
Mhm.
That's really a tough line to walk. And I just was like, it made me laugh a couple times when like you're reading through it and you just see all these things. Like one of the main characters, the one that we mentioned, was agoraphobic. He just keeps growing weapons. He can't control it. He just, as he gets scared, more weapons pop out, but he doesn't know how to put them back. So he's walking around. He's kind of like a giant turtle full of cannons. And his arc was wonderful, especially when he. I guess I can't. I don't want to give too much away, but yeah,
Yeah.
I know I kind of meandered there because again, there's so many cool storylines to follow for a 6-volume series. it's got so many interwoven plots. You would think it was easily 10 or 12.
Yeah, and it's not, I don't think there's any one of these subplots that I'm like, this character. Like, no, I'm very invested in every little side plot line they do here.
The only one that I hated at first involved the unicorn. When I was reading the issues, I was kind of iffy because they introduce a character who's basically a giant kaiju unicorn who's fond of children. And I wasn't sure where they were going with that because as a queer person, I was wrong to doubt the writer because the writer actually, I can't give away all the storyline, but the writer delivered. But there was that moment when I'm like, oh, where are we going with this? This could be very, very bad because this is a giant monster obsessed with children and it's a rainbow unicorn. Where are we going with this? And the storyline actually, it's meant to be hard hitting. And that was the only time in the series when I'm like, I don't think I'm going to like this because I live in a conservative state. I hear about conservative laws that are passed all the time. There are times when, I like to see myself represented in comics, but then there are times when I'm like, oh no, I've not that storyline because that's
Hmm.
really hard hitting. But this one did deliver, and it is horrifying. But I think the people who read it, you're gonna. It's one of those long arcs where you're gonna get the payoff much later, but there is a payoff to it. But it's also something I think we've talked about is just how creepy the comic can be at times too, because that character hits every button on purpose where it's not just like this and I say these words with respect. The unicorn is portrayed as like a very like mincing feminine gay guy, like mannerisms, how he grooms himself, how he walks. It almost seems like when you meet this character it's like, oh, is this a very poorly thought out stereotype? But the Zander Cannon does explain a lot more about that. But that was the only storyline that I read it or started reading it and I'm like, oh, this gives me pause because this could go horribly.
Yeah, and I mean, I really enjoyed aspects of that character in that, like, we've seen drug use among the kaiju, but he kind of embodies like psychedelic culture. Like, I would say he's like if Miss Frizzle from this Magic School Bus was instead a giant kaiju that just makes kids trip balls, and that's their magic field trip. Like, there's even school bus stuff involved, but like there's a lot of familiar language from like figures in the psychedelic culture, some like more problematic ones of like being like, oh yeah, like it's a good thing, or like we're gonna let them go hard and they'll face inward, and like it's clear he's kind of trying to manipulate them and like position himself somewhere in there, like he's the charismatic leader that's using psychedelics as a tool to get what he wants.
Yeah, like the way he wins over people and seeing how creepy his magic is. I mean, we talked about a character earlier that was the son of a devil, but he looked like a cute little goat creature. And then this character is he very much plays on the fear of like an intruder, of a threat, and it works in the fact that it kind of tells you up front you're not going to like this character. Like you kind of hold out hope, like you're kind of like, but it's a unicorn. I love unicorns. But then you see just enough things where it's like, oh yeah, they're tripping balls in a bad way. They've got like blood coming out their eyes. He is not a good guy, especially since he's just walking around giving people acid, like
Hmm.
really, really strong acid to giant monsters.
Really my highlight of the series of like, okay, if you're gonna check out one volume of the book and say your library's missing volume one, volume four works pretty well on its own and is everything I could want out of a comic without ever realizing it's what I wanted from a comic. And that this one follows the women's prison of Kaijumax. And
Yeah.
it's orange is the new black meets Power Rangers. And that's the perfect comic for me. Like the warden is the Green Ranger. Like she's got the same chest thing and a giant dragon mech. And before this point, all of the mechs we've seen have been like more Gundam inspired, I would say, or maybe a little Ultra inspired. But this is when like they really lean more into like the Sentai Power Rangers vibe with their like quote unquote heroes or wardens.
And that also like it talks about things I think like I wasn't aware of that I had to look up, like commissary day, which is very important in prisons, and how if you're someone where your family forgets to load up your commissary card, you have to watch all your friends go and get things that they need, or even just also things that they want, and you don't get to partake in that. And how that can be damaging to your mental health, where people are buying things like, shampoo, lotion, other things they might need, but then also occasionally chocolates and things to make them feel happy. And if, like, one of the characters, her boyfriend, who is a bit of a jerk, keeps forgetting to load her commissary card, and so she doesn't get anything. She has to just stare at people, and she doesn't get a comb, she doesn't get any makeup, and it one of those things where I learned how that can just be, it's like a miniature holiday for people in prisons, where that's the day when, I know it sounds silly, but if you've really been wanting to get a bag of chips and you've been eating nothing but what's in the commissary for a week, that can be important. I mean, I've never been in prison, but as someone with, like stomach problems, I've had to give up food. And then there are days when I'm like, no, this is a day when I'm going to have like a really big steak. And if I don't get the steak on that day, I'm sad. And obviously, it's not the same as someone in prison, but having been the person at a table watching everybody else enjoying whatever steaks they want, and me just staring at them while eating just my basic food, it really teaches you like how we need to do more to help people in prison. And I'm not saying that everybody who goes to prison should be like treated with kids gloves, but I am a really strong believer in reform. Like, unless we're intentionally going to keep these people for the rest of their lives, we have to let them out eventually. And why are we not working on making them into better people? Like, I mean, it seems like a lot of prisons, from what I've observed, a lot of them are just cruel and mean and beat people down, and then they just let people go one day. And I think that we should be doing more to help people with their problems and figuring out why they do it. It's very expensive. I'm not doubting that, but unless we're going to keep someone for the rest of their life, we should really do something to help people.
And I do think this fourth volume kind of explores that. Like, it looks through the eyes of like a prison where the warden is trying to do good and make a better place, and like seeing the pitfalls even that has. Like, they still have to struggle with guards that are like being brutal, or like outright abusing the prisoners in outright damaging ways. And I wouldn't say it demonizes at all the idea of like trying to reform prison, but like instead showing just how even with the best intentions, like this is a fundamentally broken system that's historically employed some very damaging people, and like how hard it is to even work within the system to bring that reform into being.
Yeah, and some of these people are like a really strong theme throughout the series is some of these people who are picked up are essentially they're illegal immigrants is how they're treated. Like Electrogore, yeah, he feeds on power lines, which is damaging, but he needs it to live. He's not walking around destroying cities, but he gets arrested one day where he leaves to get food and he gets picked up and he's processed and sent to a prison where they're like, this is where you monsters belong. Monsters live on Monster Island. That's where you belong. And he's taken away from his family, and he wasn't meant for prison, and he didn't do anything wrong. He just fed on electricity. And I think that was just Zander's way of talking about how in prison, yeah, there's some bad dudes in prison, but there's also a lot of people where either they were immigrants who got picked up and for some reason were in jail instead of like deported, or maybe they were framed for crimes they didn't commit, or even also, what if the crime was really minor? I mean, Electrogore, yeah, he damaged power cables, which to a human, that's like $1 million problem. That's really serious. That could be really bad. But in a world with like quantum computers, time traveling aliens, starships, he just nibbled on some power cables. Why is he going to prison for the rest of his life?
On a lighter note, I do want to call out one of the jokes of this volume that like I felt so seen. So every member of the crew at this women's prison has a giant mech they get into. For the most part, they're just regular people that like one's got a dragon mech, there's one kind of like Gamera, a bunch of different ones. And then at the end of the night, or when things like get escalated at the women's prison, they all combine into one giant mech. And then they casually, because it's the board of directors driving it, they casually mention that they call it the mega board. I'm like, Oh my God, this joke was written specifically for me. Megazord pun. Oh my God, I can't believe I found this in a comic. And yeah, I was freaking in love. Like I was resold on these later volumes that I had only just discovered existed.
Well, someone told me like the bunny cartel apparently comes from some joke about medieval manuscripts where bunnies were the villains on like the in the sidebars where like bored monks would draw bunnies attacking people. And apparently in one of those, the bunnies are seen coming down from the moon. So you have a bunny cartel on the moon who make money robbing people and taking their stuff.
That makes me wonder, like, was this just a few people's like fun doodle that caught on like an old-timey meme, and now like anthropologists have to wonder if this was like a deeply held religious belief or cultural belief that oh yeah, don't mess around with bunnies, they're evil.
I don't know, like there are times when you look through those sidebars and you find like snails with like literally flails for eyes, and you're thinking, this guy was bored. He just got really bored.
Hmm.
Then there are other times though, like one of my favorite anecdotes about medieval lore, because I have a degree in history, is that Christianity used to be a whole lot cooler at times, and you could go on like pilgrimages and go to like churches known for fertility, and they would give you dick pins that you would pin to your cloak.
Hmm.
I would literally just be like, "Oh, you went to the church over in Italy for fertility," and it's like just a giant. It's balls in a dick. It is sometimes it'll have wings, sometimes it has a halo, and I just want to imagine like back then, because we think about in the Middle Ages how the church is kind of like very oppressive. What bishop signed off on that, going, "Man, we got to increase tourism. You know what increase tourism? Dicks." And just somebody else going, "All right, let's make dick pendants. Let's make dick pins. Got to fill them pews somehow."
That might be what I call this episode, Dick Pins.
Pins.
On Dick Pins and Kaijumax featuring Sarah Kennedy. How do you like that being in your Google search results?
I love it. I love it better than some of the search results for my dead name, where my dead name is John Kennedy. So there apparently was someone very famous in the 60s. Then I started going by like John D. Kennedy, but I didn't Google that first. And so then I Googled it one day thinking, oh, I've jumped to the top of the search results. And Confederate General John Dobie Kennedy.
Ah.
Oh, that's not fair. And like 3 down, it's me. But it's like, oh, come on.
Dang, I mean, I know you said you were raised with some prejudice, like in a bad southern town, but Confederate General, Sarah? Geez, I don't know if I can be okay with that.
That's great. Well, I'm going to delete this recording. We've never met.
Yeah, not getting canceled for this.
That's how I felt though when it's like, oh, I've been telling people to look for John D. Kennedy online. They must think I'm just really into like the Confederacy. Oh,
Now, good.
another thing I guess we touched upon it was also like some of the racism that's talked about in the series too, where we did talk about like the cryptids and like the other ones, but the series does a really good job of like how there's even like the normal looking monsters. Like there's a monster who's something like Geonite something, and he's to
Yeah.
protect Korea. And he looks like a giant wooden knight, and everyone loves him. But the hero that saved the town multiple times is this, I believe she's called a Mongo, and she's like this ogre-like kaiju who has saved the city more times, but they arrest her on site where she beats like the big menace, and they go, "That's the monster, gotta arrest her." And it's interesting how it talks about appearances, where some of the creatures in the prison look completely threatening, and then others look peaceful and benign, like a giant volcano, where it just shows you your deepest, darkest secrets in a horrifying way on purpose.
And I was really curious about Geonite and really all of the South Korean kaiju they show, because I do know that there's like plenty of kaiju movies from that nation. And I was wondering if like Geonite and Mongo, like if those were direct parallels with movies I'm just not familiar with. But like,
I don't know either. It was good though. He was cheesy and dumb, but yeah. Oh, probably a weird note to bring up towards the end of the episode. There is a whole lot of kaiju sex in there, like consensual sex too. So like Geonite scores it big with a space empress, and you don't see like completely graphic things, but the way it just pops up randomly, it's like, well, where's Geonite? What's he doing? And then it cuts away, and he's getting it on top of a bunch of destroyed buildings.
With like a UFO mech looking thing.
Yeah.
Now, things I want to make sure we touch on, like I just want to know if there were any like favorite references of yours you caught in this that we haven't touched on yet.
I love the Voltron references, especially in the first two volumes, where
Mm.
the world is protected by all these different guardian teams, and one of them, like, it's a giant robot that continually summons like Thunderbirds-esque vehicles to give it more weapons, and these weapons are sometimes like like a jet that turns into a chainsaw or a ship that turns into a boot. And it made me just giggle just because I'm trying to imagine a world where there was an engineer who had to work on that. And a friend of mine's band, they're called the Shake-Ups. They do homages to different cartoons, and one of them is Voltron. And my favorite song from them is literally "I'm a Leg." It's a catchy song, and it just made me think of that the whole time I'm reading it. I really liked the whole like the rap battling kaiju, just
Yeah.
because there's this kaiju where he's like trying to fit in, be normal, and be the ex-con with a noble job, and he's trying to not talk and rhyme, and he's trying to fit in with coworkers after work. And then he gets really mad, and then he gets really mad because he starts rapping and battling.
Yeah, and him and his brother are like direct references to War of the Gargantuans.
Yeah.
Gargantuas, yeah, like the weird Frankenstein giants, which I hear is like a great classic Toku movie that haven't seen, but it's on the list.
I just love all the little references, but those were my favorites. And and just because it's super cheesy, but I really love it. I love seeing the Mecha Godzilla characters heads up display and how he just has like weapons everywhere, and they're all really silly sounding, like X-ray cannon,
Eye drill.
yeah, eye drills, which sound horrifying.
I really liked some of the references to like non-Toku things. Like it was a small throwaway line, but they interrogate one of the creatures from like the underworld Lovecraftian area, and like as they're giving the report of what they learned, they just have a line of like, also, time is a flat circle, but I'm not sure how that relates to anything. Which I had just finished watching True Detective, and that's like what Matthew McConaughey is always going on about. Time is a flat circle.
That was
And
really good. I love that series.
oh yeah, I didn't expect to love it so much, but like I wanted a lot more of that Matthew McConaughey afterwards. Like I just know him being all memed now, but Matthew McConaughey in True Detective is such a vibe. Like I love to just go on little McConaughey rants anytime a psychedelic idea comes up.
It works. Like, oh man, I know I've said that probably like 90 times, but it almost like the series needs that humor. Where like I think if the series didn't have that humor, you would lose interest because after a certain point, it would almost be like a really whimsical sociology study. And the jokes, the inside jokes, I think it has to remind the reader that it's like, yeah, we're having fun, we're learning, but we're having fun. One of the things that I also enjoyed was there's the character I mentioned, like I think he's like Red Gargantua or something, and he's like, "You smoked all my smokes, man." He's holding up these upside down smog stacks. Oh, and I forgot about the guy that keeps sharks like they're pigeons. Like
Oh yeah, like megalodons. That's like a special treat for him.
yeah, he keeps them alive though, and he has all these names for them. And if I was a giant creature, I'd have giant sharks as pets. Like I would.
Of course. I think my favorite thing of like, I can't believe you put this in there. It didn't need to be there, but the book is better for it. They bring in like a shipment of human-sized kaijus, like what you'd see in a like Kamen Rider episode or something, and they're like an acting troupe, and they put on this musical play that's like about kaiju history,
Yeah.
and it's clear they're doing Hamilton, but the plot is the original Godzilla movie, and like the scientists in it, and like the invention of the oxygen destroyer, and like that's just the whole through line of that volume is like they'll keep cutting to this kaiju history as wrapped by little kaiju.
It was because they show it from like the perspective of the monster and talk about how it's like, hey, you're born and you're in this new world and you've got all this power, but everyone hates you. And yeah, you accidentally destroy a city, but there are times when you want to destroy a city. And it's like, you know what? I'm a good person, but also if I was a giant monster and there was a city and I was reasonably sure it had been evacuated, I'd probably destroy the city. I mean, I would aim for like, like the shopping mall and like the abandoned parts of the city.
Yeah, the places the Power Rangers are always fighting. Like, it's the safe ground. But those scenes with the Hamilton crew made me wonder if Zander Cannon actually has some stage experience, because one of the issues ends on this like really genius like lighting effect of like they kind of shine a skeleton onto the exterior of an actor to like portray the oxygen destroyer going off or like his death. And like it's a really subtle effect they apply over a couple panels. And like maybe Xander's just a genius artist, but like this feels like someone who knows a thing or two about stage lighting made
And
this.
seeing giant monsters be stagehands was also just like I did stage crew back in high school, which was forever ago. So I'm not sure if my experience really applies here, but I could definitely see where it's like you see monsters in the background trying to stay off stage while they're like simultaneously moving curtains, or having giant monsters portray humans where they're like, I'm Mr. Scientist and I've created the oxygen destroyer. And he's got glasses and a giant trench coat on. He's like walking like a human would across the stage, waving at everyone.
One of the like ones that really surprised me, but like was a delightful little reference. When one of the female guards is going to be like giving birth in a later volume, they call 911, and the paramedics that come to help deliver the baby are the Dinobots from Transformers, all decked out in like paramedic gear with like a hologram hospital they project. And like that was just when it really clicked that just how like in Venture Bros, how they always bring in like some character briefly mentioned or seen in the background for like anytime they need a new plot relevant character. In this, like every time there is a narrative hole that needs to be filled, Zander Cannon comes up with some like hilarious reference that like it's just like it's clever, but it also fits what's needed really well. And it's like, yeah, the paramedics didn't need to be the Dinobots, but like it makes me really happy that they're here.
One of the Sentai protectors of the world, he flies around on a flying bike, which looks just like Captain America's bike from the Captain America movies from the 80s. This silly, cheesy, like hang glider bike, which we still don't know why Cap's rolling up on the Red Skull on a hang glider bike, but that's basically what it looked like.
It's called style, baby. Now, yeah, having addressed, I think, all of the like great standout references that I had like written down as I was reading the series, I think we're probably ready to start wrapping up for the question of the week, unless you have any final notes you want to throw in about Kaijumax.
No, other than it is a series where if you're someone that always wants crisp, clean artwork, like if you read like the current run of Avengers and you're used to that kind of artwork, this is not going to be a comic with that kind of artwork. But the art style really works for the story they're trying to tell. And I think if you give it a second chance, it's a really fun series that will make you think.
So today, for our question of the week, I wanted to tailor it to you as someone who has quite a bit of experience with Tokusatsu adjacent games. Do you have any particular favorite or highly recommended games specifically related to kaiju and Tokusatsu that like shine out above the others, right? What's your personal favorite kaiju related game that can be a tabletop, an RPG, or even a video game?
That is hard. And just games, not like movies or anything, just games.
Yeah, just games. It has to be in the realm of
It's
games.
so hard because there's a lot of them. There's one from like the Sega Genesis era, which I want to say was called Destroy All Monsters. It was an arcade beat 'em up where you played as like 8 different giant monsters. Yes, I'm cheating by looking at my tablet off camera. I really like Pacific Rim from Evil Genius Games, which is another game that my friend Brian's worked on. It uses a system similar to 5th edition D&D, and
Okay, so it's a tabletop.
yeah, and I'm a huge fan of that universe, where I thought that universe has been criminally underexplored. Like we got one really great movie, and then one okay movie, and then a very confusing anime. But it's one of those. It is one of my favorite settings. And one of my favorite kaiju board games is King of Tokyo.
Yeah, that was the main one coming to mind for me. That one's a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's so cool. I've spent a lot of hours playing that game. I used to play a similar game, which was a miniature game. It was called Monster Apocalypse, which is still out, although I haven't played it in years. but they've covered like every single kind of trope. Where last time I looked at the website that had the game, they had giant apes, they had invading Soviet Union doppelgangers in giant tank mecha.
Hmm.
It's one of those things where like the miniatures always seem to be more collectible to me than the game, because I enjoyed the game, but I also just like collecting the miniatures more.
Yeah, and that Pacific Rim one, had no idea that had a tabletop, but like, does that play with the whole like synchronization thing between two people as one of the
It
mechanics?
is. I haven't. I love reading the books. I haven't got a chance to play it yet, but I know that you pretty much you pair up with someone there at the table. Although they have an option to have like a three pilot Jaeger, just like there was in the movies, and you work together to pilot a Jaeger as you're fighting the kaiju. And of course, you're not playing as the
Hmm.
kaiju in the setting. You're playing as the Rangers, which again, I love how the reference in Pacific Rim was like, wait, you're all Rangers? That's a very specific name for people piloting giant robots.
Yeah, I gotta look into that because like my one major complaint about the Power Rangers tabletop, at least its base game release, was like I thought the mechanics for the like combined Megazord were really vague and really sparse, and that was like the main mechanic I wanted from that game, since like there's a million superhero games out there that I can like rework to be more tokusatsu flavored, but like I specifically wanted a game designer better than myself to come up with mechanics for like how to get multiple players to control one giant mecha in a way that's like fun and satisfying.
That's so hard to do. Like, because a lot of games, they're like, one of you's the pilot, and then the rest of you just kind of like hangers on, like literally. And it's like, oh, that's not as much fun at the table. And then other games have tried to be like, oh, well, what if we just pass the ball around and like everybody gets to be the pilot for a turn? But that can be frustrating because then what if each player wants to do something different? But I think that we're now kind of like in a nice era of like game design where it's not just like the 1980s, and it's like we've got this thing called a D20. How do we use a D20 and to make a giant robot? Now it's oh well, we've got like this setting, and we can modify it with this hack, and we can get a pretty good game out of this. And all roads pretty much like lead to fun.
And I think the answer I would throw out there that I'd tie into this would be Chroma Squad, which is like a computer kind of Final Fantasy Tactics
Yeah.
style RPG tactics game where you play a group of actors that are on a show like Power Rangers, and like you have to upgrade their special effects and suits, and over the course of the story you start to realize like, oh, this might be like kind of real what they're doing. But their giant robot fights, I think, have the closest thing to a mechanic that, like, if I were a better designer, I think could translate of like, depending on what mechs you use, there's like cards of the moves available to you. So like if each character, depending on what robot they contribute, has like a number of like what set moves they're able to do on their turn, either passing the buck or like, okay, I can buff us in this way, or I can contribute this to a turn with this kind of cooldown or something, would probably be the way I'd want to do it. But yeah, Chroma Squad's great. It's on sale on Steam like all the time. And yeah, like I think is from a pretty cool studio. And like I love the story of it. I love its world. And if any of the people behind that game are out there, I would love to make a Chroma Squad comic because like it's Power Rangers, but you can do almost anything and play with like the fact it's a show. That's a awesome creative sandbox. Like I will gladly enrich this IP. Like let me help with
I
this.
love really meta like comics and everything too. So that would be my jam.
Now, Sarah, as far as your upcoming projects go, what can you tell our listeners about like any upcoming games or other things you're working
We
on?
just had My Little Pony, a story for all seasons drop, where it's four themed adventures for each of the seasons. And then I wrote an adventure which features the Griffins, who are one of my favorite characters to explore in My Little Pony. I get to write about Griffins, and I know it's weird. I like obscure, weird animals, but I've always loved birds, and so bird-themed
Hmm.
monsters are really cool. Getting to work on the Griffins and explore their culture and talk and not just portray them as like, because there's the negative stereotype of, oh yeah, they're obsessed with greed and gold, and trying to move beyond that and be like, they can be heroes too. I mean, they're great bad guys, but they can be heroes. I just had the Werewolf 5th edition Storyteller screen drop. So if you're a big Werewolf fan and you need more help with running your games, it's a pretty nifty add-on. And then from Renegade, I designed a lot of the equipment and mobile bases for the G.I. Joe Quartermasters guide, where I got to I know this is going to sound super nerdy for the people at home, but I got to look up old school toys, look up the little things on the back of the boxes for the old school toys, and then be like, okay, what if I was actually a weapons manufacturer trying to pitch a terror drone to some terrorist outfit? I'd be like, this is your terror drone. This is what it's used for. This is the many uses. This is its weaknesses. This is its price point.
Wow, that sounds like the most fun way you can like repurpose those. Are like, I love that you got to look at the backs of old toy boxes for a job, like for professional reasons. That's rad.
It's fun, and I couldn't afford the cool GI Joe vehicles when I was a kid, so I'm reading all these things like the weird like shark looking submarine that Cobra had and the weird laser weapons it has attached to it, trying to come up with a practical and reasonable reason for like the Cobra covert spy post, which is basically like a barricade and binoculars, and be like, yeah, so this is a real piece of equipment and why it would be useful, and not just take the binoculars off and hide in a tree.
Now, Sarah, for our followers that want to know where they can follow your future projects, games, and hopefully this comic someday, where can they find you?
You can find me over on Blue Sky as Triceratops, triceratops.bluesky. Whatever their naming thing is, but Triceratops. Really wish I had grabbed Biceratops, but it was already taken. And then you can find me over on Twitter as, I hate that I'm so old, I look up my own name, Sarah Stone 83 over on Twitter. I post rarely over there, but it is one of the best ways I can promote my work because my engagement's pretty big over there.
And yeah, I'm a big old fan of Blue Sky. Like, it feels just tailored right. I'm not getting a bunch of crap suggested at me. All the bigots still have Twitter, so I think they just don't really bother to move to Blue Sky. And Blue Sky has some really nice blocking lists for the transphobes that are on there. So, yeah, big endorsement for Blue Sky for me. Like, it's my own little mini Twitter of the creators I really like that are super involved there.
And it's still fun. It's got some kinks it needs to work out, but overall, I really enjoy it as a platform because it reminds me of how Twitter used to be. The only thing that I really hate is how if you comment on someone's post, it shows up for everyone else. Not that I say anything like salacious or, mean over there, but it's just people are like, you talk a whole lot about the paper shortage in the gaming industry, and that's clogged my feed. And I'm like, oh, sorry, but it's kind of important. Sorry, I could talk about paper a lot.
Yeah, and they do have settings that like, okay, a response has to receive so many likes to show up on your feed, and that does come in handy because I had the same problem when I first signed up of just like a lot of responses to conversations I was not following being the majority of my feed. But bringing this home here, if the listeners at home have requests or recommendations for content you'd like us to cover in the future, you can send them our way on social media. You can find us on the Giant Sized Violence Facebook page, on Twitter is @UltraMegaCast, or email us at giantsizedviolence@gmail.com. I'd like to thank you for giving our podcast a chance and give a special shout out to artists Ray Day Parade and Dark Moon Home Video for designing our logo and our cover photos. Also, special thanks to Sarah for joining us today. Thank you so much for coming on just to gush about Kaijumax with me.
As you can tell, sometimes I just get so excited that it's kind of like, oh, let's talk about every single nuance of the comic all at once. But yeah, thanks for having me. This was a ton of fun.
Our intro and outro music is You're an Ace Kid by Demon Dice from their album Alcatraz. Check out 3P, Shut Up, Get Happy on iTunes and Spotify. We hope you join us again next time as we continue to explore the world of Tokusatsu comics. But until next time, take care and remember to do your part in preventing the spread of the kaiju virus.
Freedom can't be seen by downcast eyes. So raise your gaze up till your 10 feet tall and shake your fist to the sky. Refuse to die or let them make you small, cause they love just to see you convinced you're just a brick in the wall. But you're not just a brick in the wall. La da 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 da.